Hey lovely students, I'm Kave and today's lesson is another grammar English tenses series. Past continuous or past progressive. Let's learn how to use it and when to use it. When we want to talk about past, there are two basic English tenses. Past simple and past continuous. An example of past simple is I worked. An example of past continuous is I was working. Let's find out the differences. When we say I worked, it happened in a specific time in the past. But when we say I was working, we are more focusing on that period or that duration that one action was happening. How long that action was happening is important. Let me show you in a timeline. If we have now as 12 a.m., which is now 12 a.m., and we have 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. in the past, we started something at 9 and we finished it at 5. They are specific time, but between them, I mean from 9 to 5, we were doing something. Like I was working from 9 to 5. That was an example of past continuous. Now let's find out how we form it. Look at these sentences. I was working. I is the subject, was is the past form of be, then we have verb plus ing. I was working, he was working, she was working, it was working, but they were working, we were working, and you were working. There is a slight difference. Sometimes we have was and sometimes we have were. We will talk about that completely. Now let's find out when to use past continuous. We can use past continuous when we are talking about continuing during a period. For example, he was studying all day. Or we can use it to talk about continuing during a specific time. For example, at 11 p.m., I was sleeping. For example, one of your friends says, last night I called you, but you didn't answer. And I say, when exactly? And he answered, at 11. And my answer is, I was sleeping that time. Or continuing when interrupted. For example, they were having lunch when we arrived. They were having lunch when we arrived. So we interrupted their eating or that action. There are some other use. They are kind of advanced level. We are talking about planned action. For example, I was planning to call Jack, but I didn't have time to call him. Or we use it for polite request. For example, I was wondering if you could give me a hand. When we say I was wondering, it means in a time in the past I was thinking about it. So now I'm going to ask you this request. Now let's talk about when not to use past continuous. Generally, in English, we have two kinds of verbs. Action verbs like work, play, study, run, they can get ing. And stative verbs. They are describing a state or condition. Sometimes that moment can be emotional or mental. And with stative verbs, we can't use continuous form. Like these examples. I was knowing him for many years. It's not true. We should say, I knew him for many years. Or She was hating snakes. We can't use hating because it's stative verb. She hated snakes. They were owning a big house. Own is a stative verb. So we should say they owned a big house. Or they were needing to take a taxi. They needed to take a taxi. But here we have verb have. Look at these two examples. He was having a smartphone. He was having lunch. The first one is not true. When we are talking about something that is possessive, it belongs to someone, we can't say having. But in the next example, he was having lunch. It's true. It's so common. It means it was an activity that was happening that moment. He was having fun. It's okay because we are not talking about possessive or something that belongs to someone. Now let's talk about the structure of past continuous. We have positives, negatives, and question forms. For positive sentences, we say I was working, he was working, she was working, and it was working. But for they, we say they were working, we were working, you were working. And for making them negative, so easy, just adding not. We say I was not working. He was not working. She was not working. It was not working. And they were not working. We were not working. You were not working. And for making a question, easier than that, we just change the place of subject and was and were. For example, instead of saying I was working as a positive sentence, we say was I working? Was he working? Was she working? Was it working? And for they, we, and you, we say were they working? Were we working? And were you working? So easy, yeah? And sometimes we can add a question words before these yes or no questions. What do we mean by question words? For example, when, where, why. Let's make one. Why were you working? Where were you working? So easy. Just adding a question word before was or were. And there is a note about was and were. Was is the past form of am and is. And were is the past form of are. Now let's talk about the contractions or short form of was not and were not. When we want to make them short or make a contraction, so easy. Instead of saying was not, we say wasn't. And instead of saying were not, we say weren't. Let's practice more, listen carefully, and try to repeat after me, because in that case, you will learn it. We say, I wasn't working. He wasn't working. She wasn't working. It wasn't working. They weren't working. We weren't working. You weren't working. Now the spelling of ing when we are adding them to the verbs. Most of the verbs, they get ing, like talk, talking, sell, selling, speak, speaking. And some verbs that are ended in E, we just drop E and then add ing. like make, making, take, taking. And those verbs that are ended in IE, we drop IE, add Y, then add ing. For example, we have tie, we drop IE, add Y, and then add ing. It would be like this, tying. Or we have lie, drop IE, add Y, and then add ing, lying. And sometimes verbs are ending in CVC. C is consonant, V is vowel, and the last C is again consonant. Vowels are A, E, I, O, U. The others are consonant. Look at this example. We have run. Let's find them from the end. N is consonant, U is vowel, R is consonant. When it is like this, we just double the last letter. We say running with two N. Or we have when. N is consonant, I is vowel, W again is consonant. Winning with double N. Let's talk about the short answers. Because it's rude to just say yes or no. And it's not necessary to have a complete answer. For example, in past continuous, we have this question that says, was he playing games? We say, yes, he was. No contraction because there is none. And no, he wasn't. Were they studying for the test? Yes, they were. No, they weren't. Were you watching movies? Yes, I was. No, I wasn't. Now it's time for practicing. Let's have some practices to find out what you have learned till now. We have some present continuous sentences. Let's make them past continuous. For example, I am learning. Make it past continuous. I was learning. We are waiting. We were waiting. He is singing. He was singing. And we have some past continuous. Let's make them negative. For example, Jack was teaching. Jack was not teaching. Sarah was playing. Sarah was not playing. We were driving. Let's this time have a short form. We weren't driving. If you wanna learn it completely, try to make and write some sentences that they are true for you about your yesterday, your last week, that you can remember what you were doing. For example, yesterday I was reading a book, or my brother was watching TV. Like this, you can make more sentences for yourself and write them down. Let's talk about some common mistakes that you or some students might make. For example, they sometimes use the wrong tense. I'm studying when you called. It's an interrupted action, so we should say I was studying when you called. Or sometimes they are using wrong to be, like we was relaxing. With we should use were. We were relaxing. Or they have a problem with spelling. She was baking cookies. They forgot to drop E and write it like this. She was baking cookies. And sometimes they have a problem with word orders. For example, when you were going to call, they forgot to change the subject and to be place. It should be asked like this. When were you going to call? And sometimes they miss the words. Like, you waiting a long time. You were waiting a long time. He talking to his teacher. He was talking to his teacher. Look at this sentence. I was believing you. What's wrong with this sentence? Believe is a stative verb, so it can't come in a continuous form. We should say, I believed you. So, my lovely students, that was the end of past continuous or past progressive. As you know, I've got a playlist, and in that playlist, I'm trying to teach you all the English tenses. Don't forget to watch other videos. Thank you for watching.